all spreads across
So
IG
what are you
and high
waiting
yield,
for?
whether it's munis or in the corporate market.
Grab your
tight,
phone,
right? So I think
hit
what you're
record,
seeing with the positive
and let your
returns in
idea
healthcare
fly.
and high yield, you're really
The
sort of seeing
future of your
strategies
startup
to
could be just
where you
one
can actually
video
get
away.
a little bit of extra spread,
Remember, be
even
clear,
though it is below
be
normal for
passionate,
those sectors.
and most importantly,
Thanks so
be
much.
you.
Appreciate it as always.
We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Bloomberg Intelligence down there in our Princeton office, and the Princeton office is awesome. By the way,
I need to get there.
It's awesome, beautiful, great folks down there. Catered breakfast and lunch.
Must be
because
nice.
it's in the
I'm
middle
jealous.
of nowhere in Princeton. It's like out in some cornfields, so
Gotta
there's
give
no
them
place to
something
eat. It is awesome, and they take care of us down there. So that Princeton office, huge shout out to all the good people down there at Bloomberg. They got a global data team is down there. So like all the data that's in your Bloomberg terminal, that's always accurate for the most part. And it's from those people. They kind of get it done. They're like literally the folks that kind of make the sausage down there in Princeton. So we appreciate. And that's where a lot of BI folks are there as well. So all right, so let's get back to this shutdown thing. It's happening. I don't know. It's midnight tonight.
So many question marks.
Everybody down in D.C. is scattering around trying to get a deal done. Laura Davison, she's down there. She's a Bloomberg News politics editor. She's down there in Washington. Laura, what's the latest here? I know it's a fluid situation, lots of backroom discussions. What's the latest here?
So Republicans gathered again this morning basically to figure out where to go next. The bill that Republican leaders put together last night that Trump approved of, it failed pretty spectacularly on the House floor, so they were forced to come up with a new plan. Republicans have just in the past couple hours started talking with Democratic leaders. That is a positive sign that they are perhaps working towards some sort of plan to avert a government shutdown at midnight. You know, they're just about 12 hours away. This also has to go to the Senate. Biden has to approve it, so there's lots of parties here. You know, Republicans are going to huddle with the entire House Republicans in about an hour, where they're going to go over a plan. There's been lots of discussions about, do we do some sort of short-term thing just to get through the holidays and then pick up these negotiations, or you know, maybe breaking apart some of these several different packages you know, sort of several different elements of the package that they voted on last night. So, you know, just extending the government funding, maybe just voting on the disaster aid, just looking at the farm bill and seeing which of those things could get passed. But as you said, it's very fluid, very unclear, and federal agencies are starting to prepare their shutdown procedures just because they are right up on the wire here.
Laura, what are sources telling you about the likelihood of this happening? Do we see them potentially coming to a place where they're in an agreement, or does it seem like a shutdown could be impending?
You know, just given how close we are and how, you know, sort of the lack of details about how, you know, Congress wants to proceed on this, that at least some sort of shutdown is, you know, increasingly likely hour by hour. It could be kind of what we've seen of like sort of a technical shutdown where the government shuts down for 3, 4, 5 hours, maybe even just for a weekend, where things aren't as impacted. You know, any back pay will be quickly approved, but, you know, going into a holiday week, there's not a ton of things that would be delayed. But you also have folks like Elon Musk and even Donald Trump who are sort of egging on for a multi-day or multi-week shutdown, and that's when things get really tricky. Federal workers start feeling the pinch. You know, economic data starts getting delayed, and there are just big ripple effects out into the economy.
January 3rd, and then the Republicans will have a majority. Do they not just wait till then, and then they can get what they really want?
Well, so the tricky thing is there's a little bit of a lag here in that you have, you know, January 3rd, the new Congress takes over, so Republicans will have both their House and Senate majority, however, even a smaller House majority than they currently have. So they're actually lose some seats on that front that they pick up the Senate majority, but, you know, Trump is still not president for about 2 weeks in there. So there's, you know, they're still going to have to work with Democrats. At least, you know, Biden will still be in the White House. Plus, where you've seen here on the House side in particular is that they just don't agree. A lot of the things that Trump is demanding, particularly this vote on the debt limit, is something that you had 38 Republicans come out and say no to last night. Usually a vote on, you know, raising the debt limit, suspending the debt limit is something that is the product of weeks, if not months of negotiations. Trump threw this in really with just 2 days left to go. It's not clear, you know, who will win this battle of wills. You know, if House Republicans are saying, look, we're not dealing with this right now, we're not going to be jammed, or if Trump says, look, you know, you are going to deal with this, and I'm going to primary you, and you know, I'm going to basically force you guys into a shutdown. That all remains to be seen.
In the economy, what specific industries could be impacted by a potential government shutdown? I imagine defense contractors, but what could the ripple effects be?
Yeah, so this is, it really depends on the length of a shutdown, but sort of the first things that start to happen is that, millions of federal workers are not paid. Many are sent home or furloughed. A lot of essential workers, so, things like military, air traffic controllers, TSA agents will still be on the job, but not necessarily getting paid. Congress has always approved back pay for these people, but if it's a long shutdown like we saw in 2018, it was more than a month, that really starts to affect people, and they are, starting to, go 2 or 3 paycheck cycles without getting paid. So you start to see, defaults on things like, car loans and, credit card balances start to increase. Economic data is a key thing that there's a bunch of, key economic data points that don't come out. The Fed will continue operating. There are other groups that continue operating. Another question is what happens with the inauguration? There is money for that already appropriated, but it's not really a great look for Trump or Congress if there's a big celebration happening on the National Mall, whether you have millions of people who aren't working.
Exactly. All right. It's just really just amazing. But hey, we've been here before. I think we all know how to play this game. Laura Davison joins us, Bloomberg News politics editor, giving us the latest on this shutdown. Again, the nominal time is midnight tonight when the government will shut down if they don't have a deal. The question is, if that happens, obviously, how long will it be? So we're hearing from some of the people, the reporters on the ground in D.C. following this. Seems like it's hour by hour here, which, again, we've seen this before. That being said, the markets are just ripping higher here, folks. It's getting stronger as we see. We're at the intraday highs. S&P up 1.4%, the NASDAQ up 1.4%, and the Russell up 1.5%. So some solid gains. The Dow up 600 points. Let's call out some big round numbers. We're on the 43,000 watch for the Dow. So how about that? Government affairs, markets moving higher. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got fast-moving markets here. I'm going to get right to the numbers. We're looking at a big move in the S&P, up by 1.7% right now, up by 97 points. You got to keep in mind that when we had that Fed sell-off, the S&P dropped by 3% that day, but right now up by 1.7%. The Dow up 695, now up 1.6%. NASDAQ up 332. That is a gain of 1.7%. Stocks are pushing higher, a sign that the sell-off fueled by the Fed's hawkish pivot was perhaps overdone. The 10-year, 4.49%, with the 2-year at 4.28%. Gold up 1.2%, 26.26 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, 69.20 a barrel. And Bitcoin now up by 0.1%, 97,460 on Bitcoin. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of underlying inflation registered a muted reading in November. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
It's a step in the right direction for the Fed. Core PCE inflation barely budged last month, increasing just 0.1% and surprising Wall Street just ahead of the holidays. We're looking at the mildest reading since May and perhaps evidence of renewed progress for the Fed's efforts to rein in prices. Central bankers this week signaled they plan to slow the pace of rate cuts in 2025 amid evidence it will take time for inflation to slow to 2%, the official target. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Nike shares lower after the sportswear giant outlined its turnaround plan to reignite growth. Right now, Nike is down by 0.4%. And FedEx higher after the company said it plans to spin off its freight division into a separate publicly traded company. FedEx shares up by 1.4%. Rival UPS up by 2.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Norma Linda sitting in for Alex Steele. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, so check us out on youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. Again, like Charlie Pelleton, I'm trying to figure out what the heck's going on in this market, what's driving it higher here. I'm seeing a couple things. Maybe, I'm looking at the top go on the Bloomberg terminal. Fed's favored inflation gauge cools to the slowest pace since May. So maybe this economic data, people are really starting to digest it and say, all right, maybe this inflation thing is not as concerning as maybe we thought, and that might give the Fed some room on the rates here. And I think the question is maybe the reaction to the Fed's meeting on Wednesday. Again, S&P off 2.5%, NASDAQ off 3.5%. Maybe that was a little bit of an overreaction.
We're seeing real estate the best performing sector today, and then information technology second best.
Real estate.
Yeah, that's my crew.
Real estate. All right, very good. We appreciate that. Sandy Brigger joins us. She's a chief client officer. I'm sure she's got some thoughts here. The firm is Aspirient, and she joins us via Zoom. Sandy, what do you make of the last 4, 5, 6 days in this marketplace? We've got geopolitics, we've got domestic politics with the government shutdown, we've got the Federal Reserve. Boy, there's a lot of cross currents for investors to navigate.
Paul, it's been an exciting week, and every day there is a new twist and turn. We've been telling our clients who are corporate executives, family business owners, and entrepreneurs to be ready for anything and to be thoughtfully diversified in their portfolios. That's what we've been doing for them. But in terms of the economy right now, things are looking pretty good in our estimation. We have a strong economy, strong corporate earnings. There are some wild cards out there that could change things. And I think we got a taste of some of those wild cards this week, especially in terms of the Fed's decision regarding interest rates and slowing down the pace there. So a lot of volatility within the week. We wouldn't be surprised if volatility continued into 2025, but at this point on our base case scenario, we're not expecting any major changes. We think things look good out there.
Sandy, you mentioned wild cards. There's so much volatility. Where are you guys staying? What do you like right now, and where are you avoiding?
So within our portfolios, as I was mentioning, we really truly believe that now more than ever, diversification is important. And we're pretty well balanced between bonds and equities, though tilting toward equities. Within the equity markets, we do like the U.S. market, particularly large cap value. It's really has not been the place to be for a long time. On balance, we think that there's some real opportunity there. We also like small caps in the United States, also on the value side, and really looking at the higher quality small companies, so companies that have strong balance sheets, that have great business models, that are going to do well during good economic times and bad. And then we do have some of our allocation overseas. We're particularly more bullish on Europe at this point, and also Japan.
When we look at the fact that we've hit so many record highs for the S&P 500 and the market more broadly this year, more than 50 times, is there any discussion around whether or not market valuations have been too high?
In our estimation, the U.S. Large cap growth area is running pretty hot still. We think valuations are high there. When you look at the S&P 500 earnings, currently PE is at 22, an average is more like 16. So you could make some arguments that some stocks have gotten ahead of themselves. That's why we are tilting toward value in some of the areas of the market that haven't gotten as much play. But it all depends upon what happens in the economy and how corporate earnings continue in the period ahead. And again, without some of these wild cards coming into fruition, I talked about inflation, interest rates would be another wild card, and of course we have deficits and tariffs out there as well. We could see sustained levels in the markets if those wild cards don't show their ugly faces and create some surprises.
And Sandy, since the election, at least from my perspective, there's been a palpable sense of optimism, economic optimism, optimism about the markets, optimism about taking risk. Do you get that when you talk to your clients?
So our clients are mostly based in the United States. We have some that are located overseas, and they represent all aspects of the political spectrum. And so what I've noticed, it's clients who have strong political views on one side of the spectrum or the other, that are either the most bullish around the economy or the most concerned. So we're hearing a lot of different things from our clients, and our job really is to meet them where they are, keep in mind what they're trying to achieve with their long-term financial plans, and what they're really focused on, and making sure that we're helping them make decisions about their portfolios that are going to be best in service of what they're trying to achieve, and keeping a check on any strong feelings one way or the other between bullishness or bearishness. We hear it all, Paul.
Sandy, one of the latest wild cards, of course, that we're monitoring and the rest of the market is monitoring today is the potential government shutdown. How have markets historically responded to government shutdowns, and what are you all thinking about what we're seeing today in about 30 seconds or less?
Nora, the shutdowns tend to be a non-market event and a non-economic event. So we've been telling clients who've been concerned not to worry about it. The interesting thing about this potential shutdown is that it really is an early test, perhaps, of the cohesiveness of the Republican Party. So if we were to see a prolonged shutdown, and that's not necessarily what we're expecting, but if we saw one, that could put into question some of the Republican Party's ability to rally around other policies that people are expecting to come into fruition, like tax reform later next year.
Sandy, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Sandy Breger, Chief Client Officer, Aspirient, giving us her thoughts on the markets. Again, the markets are moving decidedly higher here. S&P up 1.7%. I am going to call out the VIX for Tom Keene. It is now, it's down 6 full points, now below 20. It's at 18. Wow. This is a VIX that's been 15, 14, 15, 16, exploded up to 27 on Wednesday on the sell-off, and now we're back below 20. It just, my experience following the VIX is just kind of below 20 people feeling okay. Right. Above 20 people get a little concerned. A little shaky there. And of course, we saw it explode out during the pandemic to 80, but we're not anywhere near there. But again, it feels pretty solid out there, I guess. So again, we're having this move higher in the market, taking some people by surprise, and namely me. But that's a nice trade during the day. Let's see if Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic can hold the gains. I feel like we deliver gains to them every day, and then sometimes in the afternoon they kind of peter out, which of course...
They're optimistic people.
Yeah, they're optimistic people. So let's see if they can do that. So we get that all coming up. Tim and Carol will join you at 2 p.m. Wall Street time, take you right up past the close to 5 p.m. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Norma Linda sitting in for Alex Steele. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube. Go over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. Here is a brutal headline. Nike CEO turnaround rests on unraveling predecessor mistakes. I mean, that's harsh being on the person who's not there anymore. But again, Nike putting out some numbers. I think this is kind of like the first real quarter with the new CEO, and you know, it's a little bit of a referendum. You want to see where he's going to take this company here. Just iconic brand, one of the best brands out there. But the stock's down 29% year to date. It's got a market cap of about $114 billion. And they reported some numbers. And let's break it down with an expert. And Poonam Goyal, senior U.S. e-commerce and retail analyst. She's at Bloomberg Intelligence. She joins us here. Poonam, talk to us about the Nike results that they released and kind of what you're seeing from this new CEO dude at Nike.
Sure. So the results weren't so bad after all. They were actually better than consensus, both on the top and bottom line, with an earnings beat relative to consensus. But the issue is the guidance, right? The back half of their fiscal year. They expect the third fiscal quarter, which is the upcoming quarter, to be down by low double digits. That is a pretty steep decline, and one we would have thought would improve after the fiscal second quarter results. But things are going to get ugly before they get better at Nike. That was the short answer.
What are sales looking like right now? Is there also a specific star shoe? Do they have a shoe that everyone's going for right now?
So right now, you know, they have the running shoe, the Pegasus that they're launching. They have 3 versions of that, and we're going to get the premium version out soon. That's something that they've been hoping will do well, and I think it will do well. The issue isn't that there isn't product that's going to be flowing through, but it's that there's a lot of old product that needs to be removed. And as they work through that over inventory, they're going to have margins bleed in the next quarter, and sales are going to drop. So we have at least 2 quarters of declines before we can start to see things beginning to normalize.
Poonam, talk to us about inventory. I know from reading your research and talking to you over the years, for a lot of these retailers, managing inventory is really a challenge. What's the story with it at Nike through its chain?
So inventory levels were flat at the end of their most recent quarter, and sales were down by high single digits, clearly an imbalance. We'd like to see inventories aligned with sales, and in order to do that, they're going to have to aggressively discount, which is the plan for the fiscal third quarter, but that means sales will be down. How long it takes for them to work inventory down to be in line with sales, I think it's at least 2 quarters, but more likely 3 to 4 quarters.
How is it lining up against competitors right now, like Adidas, for instance?
So Adidas is doing...
Adidas, my mistake.
Yes.
Adidas is doing very, very well right now. They have hit the ground running. Their lifestyle shoes have gained momentum. The Sambas, the Gazelles, they're very popular, and they are picking up ground and lost share. Nike, on the other hand, has lost share to competitors like On, Hoka, Adidas, you know, whoever it may be, because they haven't pushed the pedal hard enough on product, and they've blurred the lines with more promotions. So challenged, but we do see light at the end of the tunnel. We do think a turnaround is possible. We just think it will take more time than we had originally expected.
Poonam, talk to us about the relationship that Nike has with its retailers. I mean, like the local sneaker store in, I don't know, the Short Hills Mall. Is Nike the dominant player, or how does it stack up now maybe versus, I don't know, 10 years ago?
So Nike has been the dominant player historically in the more popular sneaker wholesale doors, like a Foot Locker, for example. That relationship had pulled back before the pandemic as they decided to go more DTC and pull back from wholesale partners. That clearly was not the right strategy, because people still shop at these stores, and when they don't see Nike, they're going to find themselves with another pair or another brand of something else. They've now come back to the wholesale relationship in a more meaningful way, and you are seeing more Nike shoes in a Foot Locker. But that said, you know, we talked about this earlier, Paul, is that when I went to Foot Locker 5-7 years ago, it was largely Nike. If I go to Foot Locker today, and especially their new stores, I see Nike, I see Adidas, I see Hoka, I see On. And while there is still a little bit more Nike, there's a lot of the other stuff too.
How are its athletic deals shaking out? I know they have a deal with the NBA and WNBA that's been extended.
Yeah, they're actually doing pretty well on the deal front. They have snatched some deals from Adidas in the last few years as well when it comes to soccer. So I think on the deal front, as long as they keep pushing the pedal to get the endorsements, the athletes, as well as the teams, they will gain mind share.
Poonam, thank you so much. Always appreciate checking in with you. Poonam Goyal, Senior U.S. E-commerce and Retail Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. She's based down in our Princeton office. I'm a Nike person, but I see, around the office, since people tend to go casual around here, I tend to see a lot of sneakers, and I do see brands that I haven't seen in the past.
So you can admire the other options.
I admire but I do my research, and I'm like, I remember emailing Poonam like maybe a year or two ago. I was like, what's this Hoka thing? And she said it's real.
Came out of nowhere, at least to me.
Yeah, it's real, and but it's a lot of folks are wearing them, and I kind of grew up as Converse, Adidas, Pumas, Nike. You kind of had your brand. I am loyal to the Nike brand. I don't know why, but I've always kind of been a Nike person too, and I'm fascinated by the Michael Jordan. The royalties he gets, I don't know what the numbers. It's hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, thanks to his mother, who negotiated the deal, which is. We want a percentage of every single sneaker that has the Jordan brand on it. And it's been crazy for him, and it's been great for Nike as well. So all good stuff. All right, folks, that does it for Norma, Linda, and me. Thanks for sitting in for Alex, too. We appreciate it. Balance of Power comes up next with Kaylee Lyons after this global news update.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. A possible government shutdown is just hours away if lawmakers can't reach a spending deal.
While there is apparently a Plan C in the works, Democratic lawmakers like Representative Pramila Jayapal are pushing for the House Speaker to put the original bipartisan stopgap funding deal up for another vote.
He could grow a spine right now, ignore his puppeteers, and then he could put this negotiated bill on the floor.
But Republican Anna Paulina Luna says,
"We're not cutting deals with Democrats. We're going to work it out here. I do not believe the government's going to be shutting down."
Stacey Lynn, CBS News, Washington.
CBS's Chris Van Cleve says a shutdown could affect air travelers during the holiday period.
There may not be an immediate impact at all at airports, particularly if it is a short shutdown. If it drags on, that's when I think you'll start to see the sick calls increase, which means wait times at checkpoints increase.
Now to Indiana, where Richard Allen has been sentenced to 130 years in prison. He's the man convicted of killing two middle school girls in Delphi in 2017. Michael Patty is the grandfather of one of the teens, Libby German.
Justice has been served for the girls. I want to thank the jurors. Hope they get a chance to see this, that they took time out of their lives and remained open-minded and objective and was able to look at the information and deliver a verdict.
3 U.S. diplomats have held meetings with the group now in charge in Syria. CBS's Imtiaz Tayeb says there's hope the fall of the Assad regime will lead to answers about an American journalist who disappeared 12 years ago in Syria.
The president believes he's alive. His family believes he's alive. And when those prisons were emptied just 2 weeks ago following the collapse of the Assad regime, many had hoped that we would find Austin Tice. We have not yet.
Starbucks workers at locations in 3 cities have launched a 5-day strike targeting Seattle, Chicago, and L.A. CBS News Los Angeles reporter Kara Finstrom.
The union, Workers United, represents employees at 525 stores nationwide. Union leaders say negotiators have yet to present a serious proposal. Starbucks says that the union prematurely ended a bargaining session.
On the economy, CBS's Jill Schlesinger has some new information.
There was new data about inflation released this morning called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, or the PCE. That showed a 2.4% inflation rate on an annual basis, which is still ahead of the Fed's 2% goal.
And checking Wall Street, right now the Dow is up 772 points. The S&P is up 102. The NASDAQ is up 342. This is CBS News.
TaxRelief.com.
The retailer Big Lots has announced it's going to close all 900 of its stores across the country.
Every day is Black Friday at Big Lots.
The bankrupt discount retailer was planning to sell all its assets to a private equity firm, but now expects that deal will fall through. It's planning a big going out of business sale at all its locations. It's been a rough year for many retailers. By one estimate, 45 retailers have filed for bankruptcy, up from 25 last year. More than 7,100 stores have closed, a 69% jump from the same time last year. Michael Wallace, CBS News.
The FDA has toughened the rules for what can be considered healthy foods. The change removes foods like cereals, sweetened yogurts, white bread, and some granola bars from getting that healthy label. It'll take effect within 2 months, and food manufacturers will have till February of 2028 to comply with it. I'm Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Enter Plan C. Welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lines. With just 12 hours to go until a government funding deadline, and after Plan B failed spectacularly on the House floor last night, lawmakers are scrambling to find an alternative to avert a government shutdown, and apparently it could mean they split things up into multiple votes on the House floor. But things are changing in real time, so we'll bring you the latest this hour with Bloomberg's Megan Scully, our political panel today, Jeannie Shanzano and Brittany Martinez. Plus, I'll be joined live from Capitol Hill by Republican Congressman Bill Huizenga of Michigan. First, though, as always, we got to get a check on the markets, and Charlie Pellet has a look at the Friday trade from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Kaylee Lines. We got a lot going on. I want to get right to the numbers. Fast-moving markets to the upside, big time on this Friday now with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, and yes, the Russell 2000 solidly in the green. Here's where we stand. S&P up 102 right now, up 1.7%. The Dow up 759. That's a gain of 1.8%, while NASDAQ is up 339, an advance there of 1.7%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up 1.8%. The 10-year 4.48 with a 2-year currently yielding 4.27%. Gold up $32 the ounce, up 1.2%. 26.26 the ounce on spot gold. West Texas Intermediate crude trading lower now by 0.1%. 69.31 for a barrel of WTI. Now Bitcoin all over the map, swinging between gains and losses. It is lower now by 0.8%. Last update we told you Bitcoin was higher. Right now we've got Bitcoin at 96,550. Well, a big unknown for markets is the potential impact of tariffs on the U.S. economy. Katie Kaminsky is chief research strategist at Alpha Simplex Group.
What's going to be tricky for markets is how much of those discussions actually come to fruition. And I think that's going to take time for the markets to understand sort of what of these tariffs are actually going to happen and how much of that is going to bake into prices over long term and create opportunities for positioning in things like copper, oil, et cetera, over the next year.
Katie Kaminsky of Alpha Simplex. FedEx shares trading higher, up now by 2.1%. Does plan to spin off its freight division into a publicly traded company. Rival UPS up 2.6%. Nike after earnings down now by 0.2%. Recapping, S&P surging 1.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I am indeed Kaylee Lines in Washington, where we've all had a very exciting couple of days as we race to avert a government shutdown, which of course could take effect after midnight tonight if funding is not extended. And multiple attempts at extending that funding so far have not gone very well. Remember, Plan A, introduced by Speaker Mike Johnson, was a bipartisan package, more than 1,500 pages long. A lot of measures in it unrelated to just continuing government funding until mid-March, and Elon Musk and Donald Trump didn't like it. That bill quickly died. Enter Plan B, much smaller. 3-month continuing resolution, disaster relief, and a lifting of the debt ceiling for 2 years. That didn't go so well either. It went down in a vote on the House floor last night, with all but 2 Democrats voting against it and 38 Republicans voting no as well. So that brings us today, where House Republican leadership is pursuing Plan C, which our understanding is basically taking what they tried to pass last night, but dividing it up into different parts so they can vote on each issue separately. Let's get into all of this now with Megan Scully, who leads Bloomberg's Capital Influence team here in Washington. So is this the way it's going to have to go, Megan? Basically just try to vote on each issue, disaster relief, a continuing resolution, maybe or maybe not the debt ceiling?
So yes, that does seem to be the case. So if they break it into these individual pieces, then people don't have to take a difficult vote if they support the whole package, but not one part of it. So the hope is that they could pass it this way and then cobble it together and send it over to the Senate as is. The big question is whether or not they take another debt ceiling vote. And certainly President-elect Trump wants them to, but that is very much up in the air. Republicans, the 38 Republicans who voted against the bill, definitely do not want to do that again.
Well, and Donald Trump doesn't seem to have really changed his mind about that. In True Social, 10 hours ago, he said Congress must get rid of or extend out to perhaps 2029 the ridiculous debt ceiling. Are lawmakers really willing to defy the incoming president like that?
Well, they were last night, and now he's going in the opposite direction. Usually you lose a fight and you compromise a little bit. And he's saying, no, I want even more. So extending it out to 2029 would, of course, bring it outside of his term and leave it to whoever the next president is after him, and would allow him to push through his tax agenda without any concerns about how much it costs.
But maybe some concerns about whether you could get the votes to get that through, just given how the last several days have gone. Megan, it has proven that legislating in this Congress is not easy, and the majority is only going to get smaller early next year. So when we consider this notion that they could split it all up, it does still beg the question of timing, because we're less than 12 hours here from the deadline, and it has to get through the Senate as well. Are they going to have to pass this thing under suspension, or each of these parts? What exactly is the plan as we understand it?
They are still figuring that out. There is a lot of movement outside the Speaker's office on the second floor of the Capitol. Members going in and out, trying to figure out exactly what the plan is and how they're going to proceed. Do they go to the Rules Committee, which sets the parameters for debate, and then send it to the floor? Do they go right to the floor, which would require a 2/3 majority? So that is all still being hammered out right now. I think it's anyone's guess at this moment. I think we'll have some more clarity in the next hour or two, but in all likelihood, we are headed at least to a technical shutdown over the weekend. We'll see what happens if the government opens on Monday or not. A lot of this, we have been so hyper-focused on the House.
Yeah.
But how's the Senate going to take this? The sense is that if it is a clean CR, which is the term that is being cast around, that it doesn't include the debt limit and it doesn't include all these other bits and bobs, that the Senate will accept it to allow them more time to negotiate. But it's going to really depend on what is actually the details of this deal.
Well, do we think that the Senate would necessarily find any real objection if really what is passed is just an extension of government funding, disaster relief for areas in the Southeast that need it, and for farmers as well? I mean, who's going to vote no on that realistically?
That will likely get through. The debt limit is the big holdup here. There are some concerns, though, that there were pieces of the bill that had wide bipartisan support, the original bill, such as like children's cancer research, or legislation that already passed the Senate that addressed essentially revenge porn and deep fakes. And that was all dropped from the Plan B bill. And I don't think that is a hill that senators are going to die on, particularly senators from those states. More than half of states are getting disaster relief funding. And so that certainly does help augment the support for this.
So then I have a question as we look forward into January. If we're able to get past this episode, however that happens, this clearly didn't go very smoothly for Speaker Mike Johnson. I don't think this was his ideal scenario. He finds himself in a really tough spot, as we've seen him find himself already during his tenure as Speaker, and as we saw with Speaker McCarthy before him. And when McCarthy took the gavel, it took 15 rounds for him to get it. It was not easy for him to get the votes. How hard is it going to be for Johnson to get the votes when the 119th Congress sits Massachusetts in a few weeks.
So we are waiting with bated breath to see if anybody challenges him. The issue is, and I believe you had someone on the program yesterday talking about, like, you'd have to be crazy to take this job. Who would want this job? Well, you know, it's Washington, and the speakership brings power, and people want power in Washington. So I'm certain that there are others who would line up to you know, compete against him for this job. But whether or not they could get half of the chamber, it has to be a majority of those members present and voting. So Democrats have a say, and they will all vote for Hakeem Jeffries. There are very few votes for Republicans to spare. So is there somebody else in the caucus that could get pretty much every Republican on board? I don't know.
Well, especially when we consider when Kevin McCarthy was ousted, multiple people tried to take his place as Speaker. Jim Jordan didn't work out. Tom Emmer didn't work out. Steve Scalise didn't go well for him either. It was only Mike Johnson that could get there. So if he can't get there now, who is going to be able to?
The key here will be whether Trump sticks with Johnson or whether he decides to anoint a successor.
Well, and to that point, as we talk about the notion that, yes, power is attractive in Washington, have we not learned over the course of this week that the Speaker ultimately doesn't have that much power right now when the voices of not just the President-elect Donald Trump, but Elon Musk seem to have drowned out the desires of those who are in legislative leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, the crux of power over this bill was at Mar-a-Lago, not in the Capitol. So we have certainly seen that. Elon Musk is not an elected official. He's not even a government official at this point. And he is using his powerful platform of X and his immense wealth, including his many contributions to, I think it's 18 House campaigns he contributed to, not to mention the president and some Senate campaigns. And that's where this power's been. However, we did see the limits of that power last night when 38 Republicans voted against the bill.
Well, and pretty incredible that Donald Trump actually Truth Social posted about one member, Chip Roy, the Republican congressman who had endorsed DeSantis in the Republican primary in this election cycle and openly called for a primary challenger, and Chip Roy still voted against him. It didn't seem that that threat was enough to change your mind.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about like hills that lawmakers will die on, Chip Roy will die on the hill of, you know, reining in government spending and not increasing government debt. That is his issue. He will never vote to increase the debt limit or extend it or certainly abolish it. So, and there are several members for whom that is their core issue.
Well, and Chip Roy sits on the Rules Committee with some of those other members like Ralph Norman and Tom Massey who don't want this either. So if it has to go through rules, is it really going to be able to make it out the other side?
So one very interesting wrinkle here is that those three fiscal hawks are on the Rules Committee because that was a deal that Kevin McCarthy struck to get the job of the Speaker that he only held for 9 months. And these three lawmakers can certainly cause tons of upheaval on that committee. And if it doesn't make it out of rules, then it has to go on what's called a suspension vote, which requires a 2/3 majority.
All right, Megan Scully, who leads Bloomberg's Capital Influence team, has had a very busy couple of days, and I would imagine today is not going to be much easier, so best of luck. We'll be continuing to check in with Megan and her team throughout the day as we try to get a sense on whether Plan C can move forward with success. A Republican conference meeting slated to begin just about 15 minutes from now, and we'll get the latest from one member of the Republican conference. Republican Bill Huizenga, the congressman from Michigan, will be joining me in just a few minutes right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lines. Joe Matthew is taking a well-deserved day off today, but it is an important day as we are now just about 12 hours away from a deadline to keep the U.S. federal government funded. Keeping in mind that the first two plans introduced by House Speaker Mike Johnson did not go over well. The first one died in the face of opposition from Elon Musk and President-elect Donald Trump. The second went down on the House floor last night with 38 members of the Republican conference voting against it. Now we understand leadership's Plan C is to essentially split last night's bill up into a number of different parts for separate votes to put on the floor. But the questions we have are whether they can get enough votes and quickly enough to send it over to the Senate to avert a shutdown when the clock runs out. Joining me now for more live from Capitol Hill is Republican Congressman Bill Huizenga of Michigan. Congressman, I'm sure it's been a busy couple days. We very much appreciate your time, sir. I know there's a conference meeting set to begin just moments from now where you'll learn more information, I presume. But based on what you're hearing so far about this plan, does it sound good to you?
Well, Kaylee, good to be with you. And yes, it's been an interesting time. And this, unfortunately, has become a holiday tradition, government brinksmanship. And so we're trying to break that, obviously. But am I optimistic? Well, this is progress. But frankly, you know, going back to that first original monstrosity CR that was proposed, 1,547 pages, that thing was taking on water very, very quickly before Elon Musk ever even tweeted about it. I didn't see that having a real future. What is kind of interesting now, it looks like, if you believe the rumor and the innuendo and all the stuff that's going around, it looks like it will be essentially the same bill that we voted on last night, minus the debt ceiling part. I think that's what you were talking about a little earlier, and what's the difference here? And you know, look, I said to my staff as they were describing this to me, and we were having a conversation, it feels like we're still eating a sausage. We're just not grinding it up and putting it in one place. We're just eating the pieces of the parts of the pig in a different way. But you know, look, this is something we need to get done. I mean, a lot of us are trying to get to yes, to be able to try to keep government open and make some progress and really start looking forward to that Trump trifecta that we're going to have in January.
Well, yeah, and that's only weeks away. And the president-elect, Congressman, has made it quite clear what he wants to happen here. Just overnight, he said once again the debt ceiling should either be abolished entirely or lifted perhaps until 2029, when he will be out of office. If it were to go to the floor, if this were to have a separate vote, do you think your Republican colleagues would go against him for a second time?
Well, I think it's debatable. Well, first and foremost, you have to look at what was the purpose of the debt ceiling votes. This hasn't always been in existence. The idea was to hold Congress's feet to the fire and to really limit spending. Well, $36 trillion later, that has not occurred, that hasn't happened. And look, I'm extremely concerned about this. I'm the author of a bipartisan debt commission bill that passed the House Budget Committee. And, you know, this is a dragon we have to wrestle to the ground for our kids and our grandkids, future grandkids. But is the debt ceiling, that particular vote, really the thing that is holding everybody's feet to the fire? And you know, sadly, no, I don't think it is. And we've had this debate, and those opinions sort of maybe slosh back and forth, kind of depending on who's at the White House, as to whether there should be a increase in that debt ceiling or not. It drives the debate, which we absolutely need to have, but I don't think it's been very effective in actually curtailing any of the spending.
So you wouldn't necessarily be opposed to the idea of abolishing the debt ceiling before Trump takes office, even if it can't be done this week? There will still be a few weeks of the 119th Congress before he takes the oath at inauguration.
Yeah, that is at least what we understand is going to be discussed, is looking at what happens after we come back in January 3 to continue that conversation. For me personally, what I would like to see then is what is the pressure point that replaces it? How else do we continue to have a sharp conversation about our debt and spending here in the country, which absolutely needs to happen. Doge is going to be a part of that. You know, frankly, I hope that Vivek and Elon Musk are concentrating as much on that effort in Doge as they do seemingly whether, you know, the House machinations about whether we're going to be voting on a bill or not.
Yeah.
You know, that's going to be a key part. But you know, look, whether it is you know, whether it would be doing some sort of commission style debt commission like we had with Scott Peters and myself in our bipartisan fiscal forum, or some other mechanism, I want to make sure that we don't just kind of throw this to the wind and not have a conversation about this debt and deficit.
Well, as you talk about the Doge, sir, it's one thing for them to use their time that has been allotted, which goes to the summer of 2026, and then make recommendations to legislators such as yourself as to what they think should be done. It's another to actively weigh in on the legislative business of you and your colleagues when they themselves were not elected. Do you view any of this as inappropriate?
No, I don't view it as inappropriate. Look, all you got to do is look at my Facebook or X or, you know, any of the other social media. There's plenty of people weighing in, and it's not just constituents, right? I mean, it's people from media, it's people from think tanks, it's all those things. He happens to have a bigger microphone than most people do, but in many ways, it's kind of still the same thing.
Well, fair enough, sir. I'd like to ask you about the future of the Speaker, Mike Johnson. It obviously has been a very difficult week for him, and there have been questions raised as to whether or not he's going to be able to win the gavel again in the 119th. As you see it now, does he easily have those votes, or could it be hard fought like it was for Kevin McCarthy before him?
Well, I'm hoping we learned a lesson 2 years ago with Kevin McCarthy that this is not just simply an exercise in debate about who should lead. This really does paralyze us. And sorry, it's getting a little loud behind me here. But you know, we at the end of the day, we have got to make sure that we have a leader who is strong and has the backing of the conference. I think the president's voice will be an important one in this. So far, he has lent his support to Speaker Johnson, and I'm presuming that continues. Then I think the speaker's in a strong position. There's you know, look, there's lots of rumblings, and earlier you had brought up a couple of other names that had made runs at it and attempts after Kevin McCarthy was removed, and I don't see a path forward for any of those folks in this next Congress any different than what it was in this last conference. So that's a problem. Then if you're coming up with an alternative, you got to have an alternative, and at this point there isn't one. So he's got to keep moving. I just encourage him to be bold and to be a strong leader on those things, and then I think that will help him.
And I know you have to run shortly to go hear from him and others in Republican leadership, sir. So just one final question for you. As you sit on the Financial Services Committee, we're here on Bloomberg. Financial markets are wondering what the heck is going on here in Washington. And I just wonder what your message to them would be when we consistently find ourselves in the same place where we are looking like the antithesis of fiscal responsibility in some ways. What should the markets think about the confidence they should have in this body's ability to make sure the United States, in full faith and credit, remains as it always has?
Yeah. Well, it clearly is not a pretty process. Never has been, and frankly, it never has been designed to do so, and to be clean and easy. But I would say this. At the end of the day, the right thing tends to happen. It might take a little different timeline than what some people hope or would expect. But you know, I have great confidence in our markets. There's a reason why the rest of the world comes to invest in the United States. We have the deepest, most liquid markets. You know, we've got a banking system that is you know, bar none to anyone else around the world. And at the end of the day, we need to continue to make sure that the United States remains that attractive place to do business. And I would argue the last administration with Basel III and a number of other things, you know, climate disclosure and all kinds of stuff that the SEC and the FDIC and others were trying to do, they were hindering that. So I think it's going to be a breath of fresh air come January 3 when the House and the Senate leadership change, at least on the Senate side, and then January 20 when the president-elect becomes President Trump.
All right, Congressman Bill Huizenga, the Republican from Michigan, thank you so much for your time, sir. I know you got to run to that conference meeting, joining us live from Capitol Hill with the latest. Much appreciated. Now, as the congressman was talking about how financial markets are viewing all of this, they're also weighing a number of other things, including earnings, as well as economic data from this morning. So let's see how it's filtering through the action today and get a check on those markets with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kaylee. Lines higher, not just higher, but best level of the day right now. Do want to begin with a developing story and a headline right off the Bloomberg Professional Service. Volkswagen and a key union have agreed to reduce capacity and avoid German plant closures, a key development for the German economy. Right now we got ADRs of Volkswagen. They're up by 3.5%. Again, Volkswagen and a union agreeing to reduce capacity and avoid German plant closures. We've got U.S. stocks, as I mentioned, trading at the best level of the day, pushing higher with the S&P up 105 now, up 1.8%. Dow Industrials up 794, up by 1.9%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 1.8%, higher now by 345 points. S&P higher, again, 1.8%. 10-year, 4.49%. The 2-year, 4.28%. A measure of U.S. consumer sentiment advanced for a 5th month in December. A positive development at the close of 2024. With more, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
It's a step in the right direction for the Fed. Core PCE inflation barely budged last month, increasing just 0.1% and surprising Wall Street just ahead of the holidays. We're looking at the mildest reading since May and perhaps evidence of renewed progress for the Fed's efforts to rein in prices. Central bankers this week signaled they plan to slow the pace of rate cuts in 2025 amid evidence it will take time for inflation to slow to 2%, the official target. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, the 10-year 4.49% with a 2-year 4.28%. Spot gold up $30 the ounce, up now by 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate up 0.2%. And Bitcoin now down 0.4%, 96,977 on Bitcoin. New York's controversial program to start charging motorists to enter parts of Manhattan next month could be derailed by a slew of legal challenges that are beginning to come to a head. Today, a federal judge in New York will hear arguments from groups suing over the project. Again, S&P right now up 97. That is a gain of 1.6%. The 10-year at 4.49%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet with the latest in the markets from New York. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines in Washington on Balance of Power, where we have much more ahead as we continue to bring you all of the latest headlines from Capitol Hill as lawmakers race to avert a government shutdown at the end of the evening today. Lawmakers in the House, Republican ones that is, heading into a conference meeting as we speak, and we'll await more information from that as to what exactly this path forward looks like. And I'll be joined by our political panel next. Jeannie Shanzano and Brittany Martinez today are straight ahead right here on Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Volkswagen and labor leaders have reached an agreement to cut capacity at its namesake brand while avoiding factory closures, capping 3 months of tense negotiations, and preventing further union walkouts. VW agreed to keep the brand's 10 German factories operational and reinstate job security agreements until the year 2030. Stocks holding at session highs right now, with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ 100 index all solidly in the green. Right now, the S&P is up 108 points, an advance of 1.8%. The Dow's up 818 now, up 1.9%, and NASDAQ is up 369, up by 1.9%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up 1.8%. 10-year, 4.49%. The 2-year now trading at 4.29%. Gold up $30 the ounce to $26.24, up 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%, 69.64 a barrel, and Bitcoin down 0.2%, 97,128 on Bitcoin. FedEx shares up 1.2% after the company said it plans to spin off its freight division into a separate publicly traded company. Rival UPS up now by 3%. And Nike shares are lower after the sportswear giant outlined its turnaround plan to reignite growth. Nike down now by 0.1%. Recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 1.8%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues, the Friday edition. What a week. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
Oh, what a week indeed, Charlie Pellet. And unfortunately, it's not yet over. But the clock is going to strike midnight pretty soon, quite literally here in Washington. 12 a.m. on what then will be Saturday is the deadline. Government funding will expire unless lawmakers can act today to avert a shutdown. This will be the third attempt at trying to do so in the House Republican Conference after Plan A and Plan B didn't go so well for House Speaker Mike Johnson. And we're hearing now from the White House about this. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre is currently briefing reporters. She has said that President Biden spoke to the Democratic leaders in both chambers of Congress, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, about this. And Karine Jean-Pierre says this is a mess that was created by Speaker Johnson. He needs to fix this, is what she views the situation as at this time. But let's get the view from our political panel. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is with me, Democratic strategist and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Brittany Martinez today, Republican strategist and founder at Espina and Company. Welcome to you both. Jeannie, just if we look at the words of Karine Jean-Pierre there, this was a mess, she says, created by Speaker Johnson. He needs to fix this. Our understanding of the fix, this third attempt, will be basically just breaking up what he put on the floor last night into different pieces and having members vote on them individually. Does that seem like a good plan to you, Jeannie?
You know, it's better than nothing. It's better than shutting down. But I think, as usual, the devils, hopefully there's not multiple, are going to be in the details. And it depends on what's in there. I think one big thing for Democrats we are hearing is that they don't want that to include anything about raising the debt ceiling, because, of course, in their view, the only interest of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the Republicans is to do that so they can push through this tax cut for millionaires and the corporate realm, and of course add to that very same debt. And so they are opposed to that. But I think it's going to depend an awful lot on what's in there. And of course, it speaks to a reality that Mike Johnson knows well. None of this can happen, given the state of the Republican Party today, without Democrats. So they are going to have to deal with Democrats to pass this thing.
Well, so come in here, Brittany, because you worked in the House for years. In fact, you worked for former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who found himself to be in a similar position as Mike Johnson finds himself now during his tenure. What is your thought on how all of this has gone down? Is it Mike Johnson that misplayed his hand, or Donald Trump, or Elon Musk, or all of the above?
You know what? I do have some sympathy for Mike Johnson here. We were in that position, and it's tough when you have such a slim majority. But I really do think that Democrats have an opportunity to message on this thing and call it a government Musk down. It wasn't really until Musk and Trump started going on Twitter and saying, you know what, if you vote for this CR, you deserve to be primaried. You don't deserve to be in office anymore in 2 years. And a lot of Republicans started to change their tune and listen, you were going to have the Freedom Caucus anyway, and there's always sort of those rebel rousers who will go against the system and buck the system. But then when you have the Republicans yesterday with that Trump bill, even 38 of them who did not vote in support of it, that's not a good place to be in. And I know that now Trump said earlier today, when it's Biden's administration, it'll be Biden's fault. But really, we all know that Trump is sort of holding the purse strings at the moment. Like, he's not officially president yet. He almost is. And a lot of people are paying attention. We have the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so I think that he overplayed his hand here. It's not the first time he's done it. He's done it with some of those Senate nominations as well. And I think that he's going to continue doing that. I don't think that Republicans are in a position of power in this moment, even though they think they are.
Well, and it reminds us all that we've been here before. During the first Trump administration, there was, of course, an extended shutdown when he was making demands around funding for a border wall. And it was ultimately him that had to kind of take the hit on that one, Jeannie. But I do wonder if you think the same as Brittany, that for all of Trump's assertions at this time that it's Biden and the Democrats that will shoulder the blame. How do you see it, especially if Democrats don't show up, at least in the House, to vote through a continuing resolution?
First of all, I love Brittany's Musk down. You should really copyright that, Brittany. I like that one. I think the American public, as much as, if they're probably off getting ready for the holidays, but if they are paying attention to this mess, they realize that it was, to Brittany's point, what Musk and Trump did, Vivek Ramaswamy, in after Mike Johnson had done the hard work of getting this bipartisan bill, they pulled the rug out from under it. And so I think the American public is wise to that. I do think, however, Democrats have to be very, very careful here, not only about gloating and feeling gleeful when people are in pain if this thing shuts down, but also the fact that they need to make it very, very clear that Donald Trump has himself said he owns Washington, he is in charge. And this is his mess and his mess alone. My worry about the Musk of it all is that that gives Donald Trump an interesting out to say at some point, well, that wasn't me, that was somebody else. And I don't own that. So, he is going to try to blame the Democrats and Biden. That's going to be hard to do. But wait until he tries to blame Musk. This is Donald Trump's party. He won. Republicans control Washington. If they can't do the very basic task of keeping the government open and passing a continuing resolution, that is theirs and theirs alone.
Well, so as we consider the future here, however this ultimately comes together today or this weekend or in the days and weeks to come, we don't yet know how all of this is going to go down for sure, Brittany. What we do know for sure is that come January 3rd, the 119th Congress will take their seats, and a new speaker election needs to happen. Mike Johnson is going to have to stand again for the gavel, knowing that your former boss, Kevin McCarthy, took 15 rounds to win the speakership at the beginning of the last Congress, and there's already been Republicans suggesting that they may no longer have confidence in Mike Johnson's ability to lead. Do you see this going similarly? Are we about to see history repeat itself with a multiple round speaker vote?
I don't know about you guys, but I've been saying for years that I'm tired of living through unprecedented times. So when I think about January 3rd and Speaker Johnson, again, I feel really bad for the guy. I'm not on the Hill anymore. And so when I just see things on the outside, I kind of thought maybe, someone else will come in like a Tom Emmer. However, I've been speaking with friends on the Hill and sources on the Hill who all say on the Republican side that they've been pretty happy with the job that Mike Johnson has done. But now with this whole CR debacle, I think maybe that tune is going to change a little bit. But again, we have to think about who are the folks who are saying this. It's the Freedom Caucus. Those were the same folks who were giving Speaker McCarthy a hard time when he was running for speaker. And ultimately, he was able to get the votes. And so though I know that there's people out there and they're on Twitter and they're, making a mess of this whole thing even more than it is. I think a lot of it is probably some bark and not some bite. And I don't think it's totally over for Johnson. He's done the best job that he can with a slim majority. And it'll be interesting, but I think there's still a shot that he'll be speaker again.
And does that all depend, Brittany, on what Donald Trump says, if he continues to publicly back him or not?
Yeah, and I know that there's been speculation that he wouldn't be backing him again. If he comes out in support of a specific person, I think that's absolutely going to help that person garner votes. However, it also depends on who it is. Like, if he suggests that it's Elon Musk, you have to keep in mind that, yeah, the Republican Party, they do want to placate Trump in a lot of ways. They've also built camaraderie in themselves, and maybe they don't want to support an Elon Musk or a Vivek or someone maybe from the Freedom Caucus. I think I saw Chip Roy's name thrown in there, and then yesterday Trump went totally against Chip Roy, even though he's probably one of the more conservative members. So I think that if he does endorse someone, that would probably help them. But at the end of the day, I can't even begin to imagine who that would be. Probably someone in the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah. Well, Chip Roy may be conservative, but he also endorsed Ron DeSantis early in the Republican primary. And we do know the president-elect tends to have a long memory with those kinds of things. We also know the president-elect has a certain proclivity for tariffs. And I do want to talk about what he posted on True Social very early this morning. This is a quote. I told the European Union that they must make up their tremendous deficit with the United States by the large-scale purchase of our oil and gas. Otherwise, it is tariffs, all caps, all the way, he says. Jeannie, this is not the first time we have seen the president-elect in recent weeks post something about tariff policy on this platform. Is this a real threat or just a negotiation tactic?
You know, it's a real threat. He's made it repeatedly. I think he would have no qualms about going there, but we all know the reality of that he denies publicly is that if he does that, the American public and the American consumer will pay the price for that. And this gets back to the intellectual dishonesty of people like Elon Musk. He is right when he says we don't do a good job in terms of spending and we are not good in terms of our government as to how we run our government. But he is intellectually dishonest when he supports a bill to raise the debt ceiling without spending cuts, only so that they can push through a massive tax cut. And, you know, if anybody, and you were just talking about Chip Roy, he took to the floor yesterday and talked about the fact we have to do what I came here to do, which is to address the debt. And that's what we promised during the campaign. I don't know what campaign Chip Roy was listening to, but that is not what Donald Trump promised. Donald Trump's numbers never added up to that. He talked, as your question just alluded to, over and over again about raising tariffs. So, you know, there is a huge division in the Republican Party. And Chip Roy's on one side and Donald Trump's on the other. And it's going to be a battle till the end. And I would just add Steve Bannon out at a conference in Arizona saying that Mike Johnson's days are numbered, if not over. We need to go in another direction. So Donald Trump is hearing all of that as it pertains to a speaker fight come January 3rd.
We're just getting some news, Brittany, from Punchbowl. Jake Sherman reporting from sources inside this Republican conference meeting that leadership has a slide up that has a, quote, agreement on the debt limit, that agreement saying House Republicans will raise the debt limit by $1.5 trillion in the first reconciliation package, alongside $2.5 trillion in net mandatory spending in the next, I guess, or in the reconciliation process. So I guess this is maybe pushing ahead to what's to come in the next Congress, knowing that Donald Trump has made it clear he wants this debt ceiling abolished or raised until he's out of office.
Yeah, and, you know, trying to do it now in this moment when he's not even president, again, I think he's really trying to play his hand here and show how powerful and strong he is. But when you think about it, again, when we're talking about messaging, it's two billionaires, one who is the richest man in the world, the other one who is about to be president again, who are shutting down the government potentially. And when we talk about raising the debt ceiling, I mean, no offense to Jeannie here, but when Trump wasted added $8 trillion to our national debt. He's blowing money like a Democrat. I thought we were supposed to be the party of fiscal responsibility. That doesn't seem very responsible to me. You just want to push through what you want to push through. And, you know, that tactic, I don't know if that's going to work in this divided Congress, especially in the House.
All right, Brittany Martinez, founder at Espina & Company and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Jeannie Sheehan Zaino of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, also of Iona University. Thank you both so much for joining me, and we'll have much more ahead with them in the second hour of Balance of Power as we continue to digest the news here coming out of Capitol Hill. To reiterate, House Republicans are currently in a meeting somewhere in the Capitol basement, meeting together as a conference as leaders present what the Plan C will be. Our understanding is of now, they're going to split things up into multiple votes that will have to happen. One part will be a continuing resolution, which extends government funding for some period of time, likely to mid-March. Another portion will be disaster relief and agricultural support as well for farmers, and each one would have to pass individually on the House floor. The Senate, though, is a whole other question, so we'll have to get more into that in our next hour. Much more is still ahead right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Balance of Power. Live from PC.
Well, it's deadline day. Just 11 hours to go until the clock strikes midnight and government funding runs out. Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons in Washington, where House Republican lawmakers are meeting at this hour on their Plan C. Potentially multiple votes to be held on various pieces of a legislative package that failed on the House floor last night to try to avert a shutdown and kick the can down the road until March. We'll have the latest with Bloomberg's Laura Davison this hour. Plus, I'll be joined by former Republican Congressman and former Ways and Means Committee Chair Kevin Brady, as well as Sarah Chamberlain, who leads the Republican Main Street Partnership. Our political panel will be here as well. Jeannie Shanzano and Brittany Martinez are coming up as we digest everything that's happened on Capitol Hill in the last several days. But we begin, as always, with a check on the markets. Charlie Pellet has a look from New York. Hey, Charlie, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, and what a week it has been, Kaylee Lyons. Lots going on, and a big move for the U.S. stock market today to the upside, right to the numbers, with the S&P up 103 right now, up by about 1.8%. We've got the Dow up 777. That is a gain of 1.8%. While NASDAQ is up 338 points now, higher by 1.7%. Stocks are pushing higher. Treasury yields are dropping after data this morning eased worries about inflation. Right now, we've got the 10-year at 4.50% with the 2-year that is currently yielding 4.29%. Spot gold up $31 the ounce now to $26.24. That's a gain of 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude holding below $70 a barrel, $69.58 now, up 0.3%. And Bitcoin has been all over the map today, looking at a retreat right now for Bitcoin. It is down by 0.2%, little change, 97,149 on Bitcoin. Keeping an eye on Nike shares after earnings, now down by 0.4%. The sportswear giant outlined its turnaround plan to reignite growth. The stock is down. Also after earnings, FedEx up now by 1.1%. Rival UPS up by 3%. So again, recapping, equities are pushing higher. S&P right now up by 1.8%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons in Washington, where it has been an exhausting couple of days as lawmakers have been racing to beat the clock, which runs out just about 11 hours from now. They have until midnight tonight to avert a government shutdown, or at the very least, a technical one, as we are heading into a weekend. And of course, there's a lot of voices at play. There's what House leadership wants, led, of course, by the Speaker, Mike Johnson. Then there's what Donald Trump, the president-elect, and Elon Musk, who's coming in to help lead the Department of Government Efficiency, want to see, including, apparently, a lifting of the debt ceiling. But it's unclear whether or not that can get through on this day of days. In fact, what we understand House leadership is talking about is breaking up a package that failed on the House floor last night with 38 Republicans voting against it into multiple parts, perhaps easier to digest for lawmakers who were reluctant to vote for the whole thing. But a Republican conference meeting is underway as we speak, so we want to get more details on what exactly we know and turn to Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison. So, Laura, obviously, this has been a fast-moving story. It's literally changing as we speak. At this hour, where do we stand?
So House Republicans are literally in a room right now. Mike Johnson, the Speaker, is going through the options of what they can do. And what that looks like is having separate votes on sort of the key elements of the bill. So one, just a straight bill to extend current levels of government funding through March, $100 billion for disaster aid. That's exceptionally important for people in North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, who have said that they are not going to vote for this bill unless that is part of the mix, as well as a farm aid, also important for a lot of different states. The question is, will there be a vote on this debt ceiling piece? This is really where Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump are really at odds. And we saw that play out last night when that bill really failed spectacularly on the floor. Republicans in Congress don't want to deal with this right now. It is clear there is not the votes to do what Trump wants to do. He originally said he thought a 2-year suspension of the debt ceiling was good. Then he came back at 1 o'clock in the morning and said, how about 4 years? Then that's it's not really how the negotiation works. Theoretically, he should be moving in the opposite direction. So this is really going to be a test of will for him. Is he going to say, no, seriously, guys, this is what we're doing? Or does he back down and avoid what will be a very chaotic to the start of his presidency, a Christmas week shutdown, which really doesn't look good for anyone in this process?
Well, it also becomes a question of how Mike Johnson is going to navigate this with the president-elect. Is he willing to defy Trump's wishes when he knows he has to abide not just by them, but also what Elon Musk wants, also what the will of his Republican conference is, knowing he wants to still be gavel in hand in the 119th Congress. He has to stand for re-election as Speaker in just a few weeks.
Yeah, and we saw, Trump say, look, Mike Johnson can keep his job if he's, quote, tough. What does tough mean? Tough generally means that you're defending whatever Trump wants to get done, which is not what Johnson's members want to get done. So he's in a really tough spot. And this is really where we found, most Republican speakers, in the past, decade or so. It's these spending fights that really test their ability. This kind of fight is what ultimately led to Kevin McCarthy's ouster. Yeah. And so this is where you're going to see, Mike Johnson, does he, where does his priority lie? Is it staying loyal to Trump? Is it making sure to keep his members happy and sort of providing that top cover for members of Congress who don't want this? Or is it keeping his job? Probably not all of those things are going to be possible.
Well, especially when you consider that the House is only one part of this equation. This has to be a package ultimately that can get through the Senate and be signed into law by President Biden for a shutdown to be averted. Where are the Democrats in this conversation right now? Because their first bipartisan agreement died. They had nothing to do with what failed on the House floor last night. Are they at the table now?
So as of just a couple hours ago, there was at least conversations between House Republicans and House Democrats. Hakeem Jeffries says that they're at the table. They're talking. What that deal ultimately looks like and what can come to pass isn't clear. It's not clear that House Republicans even really have their preferred path forward yet. Johnson is in the room presenting options to members, not a here's what we're going to do, which really just signals it's less than 12 hours until a shutdown. The risk of a shutdown just increases every little bit. And whether this is a short-term thing, it's not a huge deal. But if this turns into a multi-day or multi-week situation, this is going to be not bode well for Republicans getting things like taxes or immigration or all of their big policy priorities done in 2025.
It's a good reminder, though, that even if this does lapse beyond midnight, it takes them the weekend to figure this out. Because it is a weekend, you aren't necessarily going to feel any dramatic impacts of a shutdown right away.
Correct.
All right, Bloomberg's Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, keeping busy as we keep track of all of the news here from Washington. Much appreciated. And we want to turn next to someone who spent many days in the halls of Congress dealing with battles like this one. He is former Republican congressman from Texas and former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Kevin Brady is joining me now. He's now spokesperson for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. It's always good to have you, sir. And I know that what's going on Capitol Hill probably isn't all too surprising to you given history, but I do still wonder what you make of the events of the last several days.
So one, it is great to see you again. Thank you so much. Secondly, yes, I have lived these hours many times. And I think, one thing that sticks out is that I think both President Trump and Elon Musk, who have very strong support among Republicans in the House, I think are learning what Speaker Johnson's challenges are. There are 220 plus Republicans. They are smart and hardworking. They understand the issues. And, you've got to find a way if you're going to unite them. You got to find the right policies that do that. And certainly that's what the Speaker is trying to do in that conference meeting as we speak. There may be a technical shutdown. I don't foresee any lengthy one at all. Republicans are working toward keeping this government open. One, because they don't want the distraction heading into President Trump's inauguration. They are moving fast because they're determined not to make the mistakes of 2017 where they feel squandered the first 6 or 7 months of President Trump's first term. Now they're moving. And secondly, the Republicans have learned that if you shut the government down, you just abdicate the power of the purse. You give more power to the existing president to decide which agencies are open, which are not, which workers are essential, which are not. And so clearly that's not something Republicans want to do at a time. Not everyone's sure, how this government's running right now.
Well, I wonder what you make, sir, of specifically the request of Donald Trump, that is raise the debt ceiling until I'm out of office or just abolish it entirely. Does that make sense to you, especially knowing the tax reform that Donald Trump would like to pursue shortly after he takes office?
Well, I think Republicans have long believed that the debt ceiling, as dramatic and theatrical as it sometimes is, which isn't always helpful, that's been where history shows the most progress has been made in creating some fiscal responsibility. And so Republicans have traditionally believed there should be some type of debt ceiling, some type of trigger that forces Congress, to pretty regularly look at the financial condition of the country and the government and try to find a path forward. So that was going to be a very, very tough lift in the best of circumstances. But there are many Republicans, House and Senate, who've never voted for a debt ceiling bill. If they have, it's been with significant spending cuts. That wasn't part of that proposal at all last night. And so I think this is a chance again for the president and Elon Musk on the saving side of this to really sit down internally, work with the incoming class of Republicans, because I think the field in 2025, where they hold the House and Senate, is so much better field to fight on than the one they have right now, where Democrats run the Senate and the White House.
All right, former Congressman Kevin Brady, I do want to get to what this future Congress is going to look like with you. If you wouldn't mind sitting tight for just a few minutes, we would greatly appreciate your patience because we do want to go live to Capitol Hill. Joining us from his office right now is Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Sir, thank you so much for your time on what is obviously a very busy week in Washington. As it stands now, with the reporting we have out of the House about their proposed path forward, splitting a bill up essentially into a number of different ones to be voted on, can this shutdown be avoided? Can your chamber vote on this before midnight tonight?
Well, first of all, we have seen, I say this is somebody that was in business longer than been in politics. This was incompetence at a spectacular level. You know, I'm looking forward to working with Donald Trump where I can, but he prides himself on art of the deal. There was days and days, and I believe my Senate Republican friends who are all ready for the deal, I think his team was told. But then to pull the rug out from under the feet of the speaker, I mean, is this a preview of what's going to happen over the next 4 years? And with all due respect to your former guest, when I was coming back on, the debt ceiling is, we've already rung up those bills, and it's basically saying, are you going to pay your credit card bill on things you've already expended? So I am concerned. I'm concerned about if we go through this shutdown, the signal it sends to our adversaries around the world. I'm concerned about if, a lot of Bloomberg viewers, I'm sure, going to climb on an airplane in the next few days to go visit family. You got a shutdown with TSA and air traffic controllers not getting paid. This is crazy. And, chopping it up into 3 bits. And it again, as we all know, the idea that some of these extreme members on the House Republican side who are never going to vote for anything, whether it's debt ceiling or a continuing resolution, why they are dictating some of the terms, as a business guy, kind of makes me scratch our head. Last point just is the Senate Republicans, the Senate Democrats, the House Democrats, we were all on the same page. This was a bipartisan agreement, and it does bode poorly for what's coming next.
Well, of course, that bipartisan agreement is no longer on the table. So what messaging have you gotten from your leadership, from Chuck Schumer, as to what the Democrats in the Senate will be willing to vote for here? What is the very lowest bar that you're willing to jump over to avert a shutdown?
If anybody can predict what the House Republicans can pass, particularly if they're going to just try to pass it with their own members, they can't. I mean, the reality is, as people know, there are a whole group of members that will never vote for a continuing resolution. So the notion that you can do this without working with the Democrats is, the math doesn't add up. So remember the Pottery Barn expression, if you break it, you own it? Well, these guys broke it. So let's see what will come out of this afternoon. But to put in jeopardy all of these families right in the holidays who depend upon these paychecks, or the businesses that are adjacent around tourism events that will never get recouped, it is just plain cruel.
Sir, I'd like to ask you as well how you see this being foreboding, or what you think this might signal as to the battle still ahead, specifically in 2025, when there will be expirations of tax cuts that have actually led to more money in the pockets of some of these very same people you are referring to who could be hurt by a shutdown. Given how difficult this funding battle has proven to be, does that suggest to you that Democrats will have to step in to extend those 2017 tax cuts? So it's your votes that will ultimately be required for that to happen.
Let's put it like this. There has over the last year, I'm not sure there was a single bill that came out of the House that didn't have to have Democrats' help. And listen, I'm part of every bipartisan gang that's taken place. Anything that's happened over the last couple of years in terms of infrastructure or the CHIPS bill, Electoral Count Act, there were a bipartisan group of us that put that together. I think, frankly, that ends up with better legislation, and both parties have to own the good and the bad. And I think, again, with the margin, what, 1 or 2 the first couple of months in the House, and some people who will find an excuse to vote against anything, I think if they try to do this in a bipartisan way, you know, I want America to stay competitive. I want us to have the best business climate in the world. But the signal this sends, if we go into this shutdown, it's you know, I thought we've all seen this movie many times before, and there may be that final chapter where you know, there's a way out. But this is not a way to govern the greatest country, the most powerful country in the world, and it does make me worried about next year. And again, I say this with somebody who I disagree with President-elect Trump on a number of things, but I'm more than happy to work with him. I probably voted for more of his cabinet nominees last time, and I will vote for many of them this time. So I'm not here to kind of just throw stones at the other side. But gosh, you know, how do you negotiate in good faith with somebody going forward, particularly when I believe that at least the Trump team was aware of what the speaker was doing, if after a handshake, somebody reneges at the 11th hour?
Well, sir, finally, is it really only Donald Trump that will have to be worked with, negotiated with, or do we have to have Elon Musk's name on this list as well as to whose sign-off is going to be required to get any real legislating done?
I have huge respect for Elon Musk's business acumen, but the idea that he is now, you know, outside of his lanes, and I've worked with Elon Musk and want to work with him going forward. I think there's a lot of efficiency that we can bring to the government. But the idea that he's suddenly calling the plays for how the government is going to be funded or not, it'd be like putting me in as the coach for the Washington Commanders. The team would lose and a lot of people would get hurt. So I think we all need to acknowledge we all bring different skill sets to the table, and inefficiency. Again, I was a big supporter of Elon Musk a decade ago as he was getting SpaceX up and operating, breaking up the monopolies that controlled that arena. But I do hope that he understands the power he has. He's got more followers on Twitter than Donald Trump. And candidly, and don't take my word, talk to any Republican, what he was tweeting on whatever day it was when the deal came out, half of the tweets were just factually not true.
All right, Senator, thank you very much for hopping on to join us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. That was Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Your time is much appreciated, sir. As is the time of former Congressman Kevin Brady, who has been standing by for us. He, of course, used to represent Texas and was chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Now he's spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Congressman, thank you very much for sticking with us here. I'm sure you heard the words of Senator Warner there, just talking about, frankly, the fact that it has required Democrats to get a lot of legislating done in this 118th Congress, and the 119th, when the House majority is even narrower. That may be true. So how much are you catering your messaging as well at the Alliance for Competitive Taxation to Democrats who may be required to get any kind of tax package over the finish line next year?
Yes, well, our messaging, more important, sort of the solutions we're advancing to keep America competitive, to make sure our companies can compete when anywhere around the world, economic growth with a low corporate tax rate, and continuing to incentivize innovation in the U.S. Those are really bipartisan messages and bipartisan provisions, I think, within the tax code as Congress looks at it next year, in addition to keeping this growth and being able to counter China's super aggressiveness around the world. Certainly the middle-class tax cuts the Republicans put in place, the new small business tax deduction, so important to Main Street, the child tax credit, and some of those business provisions like research and development they've already voted on in a bipartisan way. There is plenty of common ground for Congress if Democrats are willing to work with President Trump. They haven't on tax matters in the past. We'll see if they will, or if it's needed. I think, again, a lesson from this early effort right now on passing a continuing resolution is that in a super thin majority, the president and Republicans, whichever party's frankly in power, has to work very carefully, very deliberately to make sure they've got those policies right and can advance them.
Well, and it's also a matter of sequencing here, sir. The man who now has the gavel that you once held in Ways and Means, Jason Smith, has been pretty adamant that he thinks if tax reform is going to pass, it needs to be included in one big budget reconciliation package, inclusive of other measures around the border, immigration, and energy as well, that's really the only way that this thing is going to get through the House. I wonder your thought on that, knowing that Donald Trump and the incoming Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, seem to still be advocating for trying to do two hard things at two separate times.
Yeah, so I think President Trump at some point is going to weigh in, sort of break the tie on the sequence. He's certainly, from holding that gavel at Ways and Means Committee, as you're doing a tax bill, you want all the factors that could be a leverage in bringing people to the table together. You want them in that single bill. So certainly Chairman Smith's proposal is a rational one, but regardless of whether it's one or it's two, I think one thing everyone needs to understand is it's a little like Mike Tyson's comments about heading into a fight. You know, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Well, reconciliation is difficult and it's complex, and you can have the best plan in the world on paper, but until you sit down with your members of Congress on your committee, in your conference, in the House, in the Senate together, you know, you don't really know where that sequencing is going to lead. And so I think, you know, it's good to have the conversations they're having right now about which strategically would work best. But at the end of the day, as they begin to meet with these new members coming in, as well as existing Congress, I think they will find a path. It'll become clear as they have those conversations.
Well, and as we have the conversation about kind of the government ledger here, if you will, with the spending on the one side, the revenue on the other side with this tax conversation, we've had this conversation many times before, Congressman, about the notion that Donald Trump does think some of that revenue can be supplemented by revenue coming from tariffs. And I know you aren't all for that idea, but he did introduce a new tariff idea into the discussion early this morning. He posted on True Social that he told the European Union that to help make up for the deficit, the trade deficit with the United States, they have to purchase large-scale purchases of our oil and gas. Otherwise, he says, it is tariffs all the way. And so while I know you aren't a big fan of using that kind of income to increase revenue, are you a fan of it as for using it as leverage in a negotiation? Is that ultimately what you think this is?
Well, I hope so, in the sense that I think it's clear, President Trump is very clear. He believes tariffs work to our advantage in moving people to the table to have these conversations. In his priorities, obviously, border security, stopping drugs and fentanyl, stopping unfair trade practices, rebalancing trade, and getting the world to buy more U.S. oil, buy more U.S. products, help us stop Chinese transshipments, put pressure on Iran. I think he has a whole host, I think, of priorities, and he sees tariffs, or at least the threat and leverage of them, as a way to bring countries to the table. And I think we're all hopeful, because tariffs can be so damaging, usually more to the host country, like America, than it is to the other countries you're applying it to. And so, yeah, I think people are hopeful that that these conversations and this approach works to bring countries to the table, and we can find some common ground.
All right, sir, I know we've gone over time with you, so I just have one more question for you as a former member, a former leader within the House of Representatives. If you had a piece of advice for Speaker Mike Johnson now and as he heads into another speaker election just weeks from now, what would it be?
Well, I would say, as a conservative, I will tell you, I'm a big admirer of Speaker Johnson. Again, I think he's taken the right approach. He listens very carefully. Certainly, his word is good. And he's, again, one of the most conservative speakers the House has ever had, who respects the views of the entire conference. He knows how thin this margin will be, not just today, but in the future. I will just tell you, I don't know that I have advice except to continue to be you, because the principles, integrity you bring, that office, that leadership, I think is exactly what we need right now.
All right, former Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas, now spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Thank you for being generous with your time today, sir. Very happy holidays to you and yours, and we'll look forward to touching base with you again in 2025. But first, we want to touch base with Charlie Pellet and get a check on these markets on this Friday. How's it look from New York, Charlie?
Right now, we are off our session highs, Kelly Lyons. Still a lot of green on the screen here as we wrap up the last full trading week of 2024. Right now, we got the S&P up 85, 59.52. That is a gain of 1.5%. Dow Jones Industrial Average holding above 43,000. Barely. It is up 658 points right now, just about a gain of 1.6%. We've got NASDAQ up 276 now, up by about 1.4%. Keeping an eye on the 10-year at 4.50%, with the 2-year right now 4.30%. Spot gold up $32 the ounce, up 1.2%, 26.26 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.5%, 69.70 a barrel. And Bitcoin right now lower by 0.6%, 96,770 on Bitcoin. If you still have a landline, AT&T is hoping to persuade people across the country to break up with their landlines by the end of 2029. And to do so, it is deploying a new weapon, sort of like an old device, though, and that is, it is offering up wireless home phones. Again, we've got stocks higher. S&P right now up 83. That is a gain of 1.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with the very latest in the Friday trade. Thank you so much. And we've been bringing you the latest from the trading and bartering and negotiating that has been happening on Capitol Hill over the course of the last several days and is ongoing today as Republican lawmakers search for a Plan C, which they are hoping could be successful in averting a government shutdown when the clock strikes midnight tonight. What this Plan C will include kind of looks like what Plan B was, though Plan B failed in spectacular fashion on the House floor yesterday because it was a bill that put a lot of these things together. Didn't go so well because it included a 2-year extension of the debt limit. Instead, they want to split it up. Our understanding, at least at this hour, things could always change, as we've learned over the course of the last few days, is to divvy things up into 3 packages. One being a continuing resolution, a stopgap measure that will keep the government funded until mid-March. That's what needs to happen to avert a shutdown this weekend. Second part, aid for natural disasters. A lot of that targeted at the American Southeast, which is still recovering from multiple hurricanes that were devastating this year. Again, pretty popular measure. Then there's a 1-year extension of the Farm Bill, so aid for farmers and the agricultural sector. The question's going to be, if it is indeed going to be 3 bills, how quickly could they come to the floor under a rule or under suspension of it? Because that's what will dictate how many members need to vote for it to pass and get sent to the Senate. So here with me now is our political panel today. Brittany Martinez is a Republican strategist and founder of Espina & Company. She's also a veteran of the House of Representatives, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, Democratic strategist and senior democracy fellow for the Center of the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So, Brittany, we have an understanding of Plan C, at least at this hour. What we don't yet know is how exactly lawmakers are receiving it inside the conference room at this time. But a lot of lawmakers obviously have expressed upset with how Mike Johnson has handled it thus far. Can he put Humpty Dumpty, which is the Republican conference, back together again with this plan?
I mean, he's going to have to, or otherwise the government's going to close in just a few hours here. I think that, this is what sort of I'm hearing pushback from. Some folks are saying he should have just put up that first bill and bucked Trump. The problem with that, though, is that despite the Democrats being supportive of it and not whipping against it, it would have frustrated Trump and, the Republican Party. And though it would have passed and we wouldn't be in the situation right now, Trump's bill that he wanted yesterday also didn't pass. So though I think it's good to have individual bills. That's always what Republicans tout and want to do. In reality, when we're getting down to the 11th hour, and I don't think we literally have even 11 hours left before the government shuts down, that's not the best policy. But at this point, what choice do we have? I think that it might be successful, but you're probably going to have folks like members of the Freedom Caucus who still aren't satisfied. And I think we will probably hit a government shutdown, even if it only lasts for a day or two.
Well, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see we got the shutdown clock up. So it's about 10 and a half hours left until the deadline right now for those listening on Bloomberg Radio. But Jeannie, I was just speaking a few moments ago with Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. And when I asked him, hey, what are you willing to vote for here to avert a shutdown? He basically said, we can't predict what's coming out of the House. I just wonder how you take that answer or what you're expecting really is the thinking from the democratically controlled Senate, which would be the next stop on this continuing resolution train.
Yeah, and it was such an important conversation you had with Senator Warner. And in particular, he echoed what we've been hearing from Democrats, which was his Pottery Barn theme. You break it, you buy it. And that's what Democrats feel that the Republican Party has done. And so they've got to own that. In terms of this three-step process, if that does indeed come out, it's going to depend on what's in there. Donald Trump tweeting in the middle of the night that maybe the debt ceiling should be raised for 4 years as opposed to 2 is going in exactly the opposite direction. If they're planning on something like that, Democrats won't go along with it. And quite frankly, they can't move forward, Republicans, because their own Republicans won't go along with it. And this speaks to a huge problem that the Republicans have. They have talked about fiscal responsibility, and yet they are supporting somebody who the Committee for Responsible Budget estimated has put forward plans during a campaign to raise the debt by $7.75 trillion. That was the moderate estimate that the committee put forward. How is that fiscally responsible? It is not. And that is what has driven this divide in the Republican Party. That is why you see Republicans very, very interesting. Donald Trump's not in office yet 38 Republicans last night, without fear, stood up and voted against him and Elon Musk. And that is a precursor of what is to come in this all Republican Washington, D.C.
Well, on the debt and deficit specifically, and the debt ceiling, which Donald Trump has said he wants to raise or abolish before he takes office, Jeannie, I would point out that Democrats have been calling to repeal the debt ceiling for a long time. Just last week, there was, I believe, 17 co-sponsors on a piece of legislation in the Senate that would have gotten rid of the debt ceiling. So is it really appropriate to be changing the two now, or is this actually an area in which Democrats and Donald Trump might be able to work together?
Well, they may be able to work together, but I'm so glad you raised that, because the difference is when Democrats want to raise or abolish the debt ceiling, which is fiscally sound and should happen, it is not for the narrow prospects that Donald Trump and Elon Musk put forward yesterday, which is so they can ram through an extension of the corporate and billionaires' tax cuts. That is what is adding to the deficit. That's why they can't get the support of people like Chip Roy. And so that is the problem they have. Yes, we need sound fiscal management in this country. And Elon Musk is absolutely right when he says we don't have it. The way to get it is not to shut down a bipartisan agreement hours before it goes through to keep the government open. And it is not to do so. Let's ask Elon Musk. He didn't oppose the defense spending bill the other day. Why not? Because he benefits from that. He did support the second bill that came forward, the CR, yesterday, once they stripped the China components out of that, because he benefits from it. So we have to think very carefully about who's benefiting from what. Yes, address the debt ceiling, but this is not the way to do that. And Donald Trump knows that, or at least the more, fiscally responsible members of his party do. And they have said they won't go along with this plan.
Well, as Jeannie alludes to Elon Musk here, Brittany, it does raise the question, as we've considered over the course of the last several days, whether or not Mike Johnson is going to be able to stay in the job as Speaker and keep the gavel in hand, how powerful the gavel really is, or if the Speaker of the House at this point is effectively someone who just has to act on behalf of the wishes of not just the president, but of the world's richest man.
I think that Speaker Johnson is a good guy. I think he's pretty common sense. He is a pretty conservative guy, but he also is able to come to the negotiating table and work with Democrats. And we've seen that time and time again this Congress. It's going to be tough if Trump every time is trying to stop what he's doing. We saw that earlier this year, specifically with that immigration bill in the Senate, with Langford, how that was bipartisan, and then that got tanked because Trump said no. So I think that Trump is going to continue doing that that sort of thing throughout his presidency. And it's going to make it really tough, not only for Senator Thune, but also especially for Mike Johnson, because he's got a slimmer majority.
Yeah, I think he's not exactly the envy of a lot of people in Washington right now. It's a pretty tough job that he's dealing with. It does raise the question why he even still wants to keep it, but we don't know anyone else who could get the vote. So I guess that's where we are at this moment. Brittany Martinez, founder at Espina & Company and Republican strategist, veteran of the Kevin McCarthy team in the House. Thank you so much for joining me. One half of our political panel, of course, the other being